Pretty Girl Club. I want to call out the hypocrisy with the term Yellowbone. A lot of people in the black community like to pretend that they are not colorist. I've actually noticed that there's a pattern where we pretend that unambiguous dark-skinned black women cannot be colorist whatsoever. Meanwhile, everyone else in the black community, they can be colorist. Everyone except if you're unambiguous. And one of the ways that I've noticed this is when it comes to the term Yellowbone. First of all, the fact that we've got unambiguous men and women policing what a Yellowbone is, that shows pedestalization right there. If you're policing it, you're pedestalizing it. Now, I understand if someone actually is of a lighter skin tone and maybe they want to know their undertones or something, but if you are not even light-skinned, and let's say you are dark-skinned, unambiguous, but then you are leaving thousands of comments underneath someone's TikTok arguing about their skin tone, to say that you don't pedestalize it or that you don't envy that, it's disingenuous. I did a video recently where I talked about how caramel is the new paper bag test, and I showed a video of a woman who was putting some caramel candies up to her face, and there were people who were making thousands of comments arguing over where to categorize the caramel skin tone. And I've noticed... Sorry, I had to move because there was a lot of noise outside, but I've noticed people are doing the same thing with the term Yellowbone. So remember how Danny Lay made that song where she was like, Yellowbone is what he want? And people were like, Danny Lay is not a Yellowbone because she is not black. So their argument is, in order for you to be a Yellowbone, you must have two black parents. But then when you say, okay, well then light-skinned Keisha is a Yellowbone then they'll say, no, she's not. She's too dark to be light-skinned. So do you see how people in the black community constantly move the goalpost for all of the pedestalized phenotypes? Because they don't want to admit that you are pedestalized in their community. Have you ever noticed this other pattern where a lot of darker skinned black men and women have a hard time admitting if somebody is lighter than them? They'll be like, you're the same color as me. Meanwhile, you're nowhere near their skin tone. You have totally different undertones. And I've noticed that there is this arguing back and forth that is happening. People are trying to throw others in and out of the light skin category, but I don't see anyone keeping that same energy with who's the darkest. I don't see people arguing about who your parents have to be in order for you to be dark skinned. Nobody cares about who calls themselves chocolate, dark chocolate, ebony, coffee colored, mocha colored. But if you use terms like yellowbone, redbone, or caramel, suddenly you've got thousands of people arguing up and down. But has anyone else noticed this? They'll be like, oh, people like Doja Cat, they're not Yellowbones because they are biracial or they're mixed, and you must have two black parents in order to be Yellowbones. And then when people say, okay, Beyonce is a Yellowbone, I view Beyonce as mixed race. I actually have a video coming out about her and the hypocrisy about Beyonce's identity as well. But it's like, okay, so if you say Beyonce is a Yellowbone, then people will say, oh no, she's too dark to be a Yellowbone. She's something else. She's caramel. Or some people will even go as far as saying she's an unambiguous brown-skinned black woman. And have you ever noticed that men in the light-skinned community are able to have whatever identity they want? They can call themselves light-skinned, they can identify as biracial. You've got biracial black men identifying solely with blackness, and nobody cares. You're free to identify however you want if you're a man. Nobody argues with a man's identity. Nobody argues back and forth over a man being light-skinned, but they argue back and forth tooth and nail and leave thousands of comments on TikTok videos about who's a light-skinned woman and who's not. And they will put you through all of these tests and say, well, who are your parents? What percent of blackness do you have? What are your undertones? Compare yourself to some caramel candy. Compare yourself to a paper bag. What category would you have been placed in during the slave days? Would you have been in the house or would you have been out in the fields? Because if you don't meet the slavery standards of what a Yellowbone is, or if you don't meet segregation standards of what light-skinned is, then you're not light-skinned. And then they say it as some sort of humbling tactic, like you're not light-skinned or you're not that light-skinned. And there's my favorite, where people will brag about their family members or their boyfriend being lighter than you. They'll be like, my daughter is lighter than you. My sister's lighter than you. Therefore, I get to determine how light-skinned you are because I am directly related to a light skin. And I've noticed that people who have this mindset, they view light skin as almost like this exclusive club. And so this is why you normally see people who are not light-skinned being the ones who argue the most over who is light-skinned, because in their mind they pedestalize it, and so they're like, wait, who is in this secret club? Who's in the secret light-skinned club? Okay, let me argue back and forth about caramel and whether or not that counts, and let's see who these people's parents are. And another thing I've noticed is people will start talking about skin bleaching. Whenever you call someone light skin, you'll be like, oh, so and so is light skin. And they'll be like, oh, well, she bleached her skin, or she's only that light skin because she's lightening her photos on Instagram. And it's like, okay, so if somebody is dark skinned or they darken their photos, nobody cares. Not a big deal. But if someone looks lighter in their Instagram photos, Meg the Stallion, then you have thousands of people saying, oh, well, she's a bleacher. She's lightening her photos. She's trying to be light skinned. You even heard Chrissy on her channel talk about how she's not a fan of Megan the Stallion because Meg the Stallion called herself a red bone. And so people are literally not only assigning personality traits to light skin. Oh, and by the way, after they've assigned you a personality trait, then they'll turn around and gaslight you and say, you're making being light skin your whole personality. Meanwhile, you weren't even talking about skin tone, or you were just minding your business, or someone else called you light skin. I've noticed that in the black community, a lot of people, they want to pretend that if you're an unambiguous dark-skinned black person, that it's impossible for you to be colorist. And it's like, if black men can be colorist, why can't black women also be colorist? So if you guys want to talk about colorism, let's actually talk about it, and let's admit that it does exist amongst black women. Not just black men. Let's also admit that it does exist amongst the divestors, just like how a lot of the men, like the passport bros or the black male divestors, just like how a lot of them can be colorist. Okay, well, a lot of black women who only date white men or whatever, they can be colorist as well. So why is it that you can only be colorist if you're light skinned? And also, when it comes to bleaching or lightening your Instagram photos, have you ever noticed nobody calls out skin bleaching unless you cross that threshold of becoming light skinned? Nobody mentions if you go from ebony colored to dark chocolate colored. Nobody cares if you went from dark chocolate to milk chocolate. That's not a big deal. But as soon as you are bleaching your skin and you cross over into that coveted light skin category and you actually look pretty, or let's say you edit a photo and then your photos have crossed over into that light skin category and you look pretty, Meg the Stallion, then you're going to get thousands of comments with people badgering you or bullying you or arguing back and forth about your skin tone. Some people will even straight up call you a bleacher or say that you hate yourself while simultaneously ignoring the multi-billion-dollar skin bleaching industry, and the participants of that are mainly unambiguous Africans. So we're going to ignore all of the unambiguous people in Africa who are bleaching. We're going to focus on Meg the Stallion. We're going to focus on Stacey Dash or anybody who is able to bleach themselves into being light-skinned. And by the way, I'm not trying to accuse those women of bleaching or say like automatically that they are, but I'm also not stupid. I know that in Hollywood, that kind of stuff is very common. Plastic surgery, microdermabrasion, skin treatments. I know that those things are very common, but it's like, okay, why are you offended if someone bleaches themselves to become light skinned, but you're not offended if someone bleaches themselves to become less dark skinned? Do you see how they don't keep the same energy all around? And so this is why I don't take it seriously, because I feel like, no, this is not about ending colorism, texturism, or featureism. This is about women wanting to feel like they are more privileged than someone else, or women wanting to take away somebody else's pedestal so they can have one of their own. Also, has anyone noticed that you will say skin tone is subjective, and then they'll be like, yeah, skin tone is subjective. Oh, except for when you're light skinned though. Then suddenly you have to pass a caramel test, a paper bag test. I have to know who your parents are. You're not allowed to be mixed race. You're not allowed to be biracial. You have to have 2 black parents and 4 black grandparents. And it's like, wait a minute, I thought skin tone was subjective, right? So which one is it? Why are you so concerned, especially if skin tone is subjective, then why are you concerned with who views themselves as light skinned? For example, if you live on the East Coast, maybe there's a different vibe to what's considered light skin. Maybe in the South, there's something different. Maybe if you're from another country or you are from, the Caribbean or something, then it's a different standard. Why do you care who perceives themselves as light skinned? And I've noticed that the reason people care is because they want to be able to control your self-perception. And it's like, why do you care what she thinks of herself unless, of course, you're threatened by what she thinks of herself? And then some people will admit it and they'll say, you think you're better than me. Well, why do you think that I would think I'm better than you? Is it because of my skin tone? Because by admitting that, you're also admitting that you think people with light skin tones have the right to think they're better than others, or that they are more likely to think they're better because of their skin tone. So who's the real colorist? And also, the fact that you're so strictly policing and pedestalizing light skin tones and you're not giving a fuck about the dark skin tones, that tells me something. That tells me that you associate light skin tones with status, especially for women. You don't associate light skin tones with having as much status for the men because you know that light skin is feminized. And so you know that for men, you know, if anything, they're going to be viewed as more feminine. So you're like, whatever, it's not a big deal. But for a woman, being viewed as feminine or having feminine privilege, I've noticed that that is a real thing. And a lot of women who struggle with their own femininity, they get jealous of another woman's femininity. So this can be anything from your beauty or makeup, or in some cases, even your skin tone. So because they associate light skin with being more feminine, they don't want you to be perceived as more feminine than them, or they don't want you to perceive yourself as being feminine. So this is another reason why women will try to police what skin tone you can call yourself. And it's like, who cares? I don't care if you call Megan Good brown skin and if Megan Good calls herself light skin. I don't care. I would never go on somebody's Instagram page or their TikTok and say, you're not light skin. I saw people doing this with Sanaa Lathan. Some people sent me a photo of her. They were saying that people were arguing back and forth about her skin tone because Sanaa Lathan was like, oh, you know, I'm getting my yellow butt out in the sun or something like that, like she's getting a tan. And it's like, why do you care so much about what she thinks of her own skin tone? How does someone else's self-perception affect you? Why do you care about how light she thinks her skin is? Or even in Chrissy's case, why are you no longer a fan of Meg Thee Stallion because she calls herself a red bone? Or for the people who got mad at Meg Thee Stallion's Instagram pictures where she was looking very light, why do you care about her being light? Why do you care about her looking lighter? Why do you care if she's staying out of the sun or if she's a bleacher? If you guys care so much about bleachers, then why are you not addressing the millions of people in Africa who are the main ones buying illegal bleaching creams to the point where they're literally destroying themselves? And so this is what I'm talking about. It's selective outrage, it is situational ethics, and it's hypocrisy. You only care about who's light-skinned when that person is pretty. Let's be honest. You only care about who's light-skinned when that person is pretty. You only care about who's light-skinned if you think that light skin gives someone more status. You only care about who's light-skinned if you think that being a Yellowbone or whatever makes them more attractive to men. And also, since when are there racial requirements for who's a Yellowbone and who's not? I just thought it was hilarious how people were saying Danny Lay's not a Yellowbone because she's too white. She's basically a multiracial white woman. So people like Danny Lay or Mariah Carey or women like that, they're not Yellowbones. Oh, but then if you have two black parents, you're also not a Yellowbone either. So light-skinned Keisha is not a Yellowbone. Oh, and also if you're a bleacher or if you lighten your photos on Instagram, you're also not a Yellowbone. And it's like, just admit you don't want any woman to be able to call herself a Yellowbone because you want to control her perception of herself. And also, that's like a cuss word. Yellowbone is like a cuss word. Redbone is a cuss word. Light-skinned is a cuss word. Caramel is now a cuss word. And then when we gaslight ourselves as lighter skinned people, when we say, okay, yeah, you're right, I'm caramel, I'm brown, I'm light brown or whatever. When we say that, then they'll complain and say you're erasing us or you're not caramel, because then they feel too dark in comparison to you. You know, because if they're 20 shades darker than you, let's say you're Rihanna's skin tone and you call yourself brown or you call yourself caramel, then somebody who's closer to maybe like Lupita Nyong'o, that's too big of a difference. Because she'll be like, oh no, I don't want to be perceived as being 20 or 50 shades darker than that. So no, you're not caramel. Now I'm going to throw you back into being a Yellowbone. So which one is it? Have you ever had people argue back and forth over your skin tone? Have you ever had people get angry when you get to be in charge of how you perceive your own complexion? Have you ever had people accuse you of thinking you're better because you are celebrating how you look and you're celebrating your complexion? And also, have you ever noticed how we are not allowed to use terms of endearment for light skin tones? Like if you're a lighter skinned woman, you are not allowed to call yourself light skinned. You're not allowed to talk about your skin tone because then people are going to accuse you of making your skin tone your personality. But what do you ladies think? Let me know in the comment section and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.